Welcome back to two more horrifying stories. I'll share with you two stories of two people who in each their way were held captive, and the surprising conclusions to their stories. Viewer discretion is advised. In the 1980s, the Ingram family lived in Olympia, Washington. The father, Paul, worked as a deputy sheriff, having started as a volunteer and quickly risen to his full-time position. The family was a church-going family and participated in countless socials and study groups. However, two of their sons suddenly moved out in 1984. One of them moved back shortly after, but then in 1988, both of their daughters moved out as well. Their young adult children moving out was sudden, and they didn't tell their parents why they moved. However, a few months later, one of the daughters, Erica Ingram, reached out to her mother, Sandy, to tell her why she had moved. They met at a restaurant with one of Erica's friends. Erica then told her mother that she had been molested by her father for years. Not only that, but her brothers had molested her as well. Sandy went home and confronted Paul, who denied ever having done something like that to their daughters. Sandy contacted the assistant pastor and asked him what he thought. His response was that Erica was probably telling the truth because children didn't make up those kinds of things. Sandy asked Julie, their other daughter, if she had experienced the same as Erica. Julie said that Paul and her older brothers had molested her too. Sandy and Paul went out of town for a bit. Meanwhile, Julie and Erica spoke to the police. They went through the last time Paul had forced himself on each of them. The police interviewed them several times, but each time they changed the time the assault had occurred. Inconsistencies in an abuse victim's story is not uncommon, but the times they gave for the most recent assault differed by years each time they were interviewed. On Monday the 28th of November, Paul Ingram went to work and was called into Sheriff Gary Edwards' office. With the undersheriff, he confronted Paul about the allegations against him. Paul answered that he had heard what they were saying about him and added that he had no memory of ever molesting his daughters. He continued speaking, saying he did not believe he had done something like this, but that there may be a dark side of him that he's not aware of. Then Sheriff Edwards told him, "I hope you're not going to make these girls go through a trial." Paul was then interviewed by two detectives for hours. They kept pressuring him to reveal the truth, but he kept stating that he couldn't remember. Paul believed his memories were repressed. Despite this, he admitted to the crimes. When asked why he was admitting to them when he couldn't remember anything, he stated, "Well, number one, my girls know me. They wouldn't lie about something like this." Then he told them that secondly, there was other evidence. When asked about the evidence, nothing he said produced any concrete evidence after the police investigation. As the detectives kept pressuring him, he kept confessing to more and more abusive acts. One of the detectives later said that he was deeply affected by how detached and remorseless Paul was while describing these terrible things he had done to his daughters. A psychologist was called in and asked the question that would give the investigation a disturbing direction. He asked if Paul was involved in black magic or Satanism. He denied this, but then in interviews shortly after this, Paul would claim that the molestations were done as a part of satanic rituals. Neither Erica or Julie had mentioned this before, but when detectives mentioned Paul confessing to performing satanic rituals on them, the two girls started to come with even more horrifying accounts of satanic abuse than their father originally had provided. Some of these accounts alleged that Paul had been a part of killing 25 infants, or even taking an unborn baby out of his daughter Erica with a sword. The police worked tirelessly to corroborate their stories. However, they found no evidence. No skeletons from the rituals, and no scars on Erica's body consistent with being cut open with a sword. Later, after being pressured by detectives during interrogations, Both Sandy and their son Chad started producing memories of these events. The stories from each of the Ingram family members did not match each other. Hoping to give some credence to the satanic aspect of the case, the detectives brought on psychologist Richard Offshee, a distinguished professor and expert on cults and mind control. However, Offshee's conclusions were not what the detectives wanted. His analysis led him to conclude that Paul Ingram, owing to his extensive and routine involvement in his church, had been unduly influenced by authoritative figures during his interrogations. This influence resulted in confessions built upon implanted false memories through suggestive methods. In other words, Paul's confessions weren't based on his memories. His confessions were based on what others told him he had done. Offshee even tested this, where he introduced an invented scenario to Ingram. Offshee claimed that Ingram's son and daughter had accused him of compelling them into committing incest with each other. Previously, the interrogating officers had alleged this, but Ingram had denied it, and he similarly refuted Offshee's assertion. Offshee then instructed Ingram to contemplate this idea through prayer. Eventually, Ingram produced a detailed written confession. However, when Offshee interviewed the daughter who was supposedly involved in this event, she denied its occurrence. This was despite various other allegations against her father. Even when informed that neither his son nor daughter had made such an accusation, Ingram clung to the belief that the incident was real, stating that it was just as real to me as anything else. As a result, Offshee became convinced that Ingram's confessions were solely a consequence of prolonged and suggestive interrogation techniques applied to an unusually suggestible individual. Offshee compiled a report outlining this theory, although the prosecution initially withheld it from the defense, only releasing it after being forced to do so by the judge. Not only that, this was not the first time Erica had accused somebody of committing sexual crimes against her. She had already accused a man she knew of attempting to rape her, as well as a neighbor of sexually abusing her. The cases were dropped either for lack of substance to it, or because of several inconsistencies in her stories that were discovered. When the police interviewed her about the allegations against her father, Erica kept changing the times of when the sexual abuse occurred. She would go from mentioning the last time being when she was little, and later changing it to 2 months before the interview. The case against Paul Ingram was riddled with holes and inconsistencies. There was no evidence to support claims from both Paul and his daughters of satanic rituals. An examination of Julie and Erica revealed they had no scars consistent with the abuse they mentioned during the investigation. Paul mentioned several other police officers as Satanists, and even the sheriff's office found these claims far-fetched. Despite this, Under-Sheriff McClanahan stated, "This office has done a remarkable job in uncovering the first ritualistic abuse investigation that has been confirmed by an adult offender involved directly with the offenses in the nation's history. Clearly, we are on the cutting edge of knowledge being gained from ritual abuse." Shortly after this statement, all charges related to satanic abuse were dropped. However, in a surprising turn of events, Paul Ingram pled guilty to the remaining charges against him. The remaining charges were 6 counts of third-degree rape. The psychologist, Offshee, pleaded with Paul to withdraw his guilty plea, since Paul didn't have those memories. Paul wouldn't, as he believed the memories of him abusing his daughters were repressed and would come eventually, like his pastors had told him. The memories never came. Rather, the opposite happened. On the morning of July 19th, 1989, he decided to pray. He claims he heard a voice saying, "Let go of the rope." A deep feeling of peace settled over him. His mind began to clear. Suddenly, he could see that all the visualizations of rituals and abuse had been fantasies, not actual memories. He no longer believed that he was a Satanist or a child abuser. Ingram got a new lawyer who filed a motion to withdraw his guilty plea, on the ground that he had been coerced in the course of being interrogated and had given incriminating testimony while in a trance-like state. Unfortunately, it proved too late to change his plea. All the lawyer could do was petition for leniency at the sentencing hearing in April of 1990. However, his daughter Erica appeared at the trial and was given the opportunity to speak in regards to the sentencing. She started by saying, "I'm Erica Ingram. I was the daughter of Paul Ingram." Then she asked the judge to impose the greatest possible sentence, stating, "Otherwise, I believe he will either kill me or Julie. He destroyed me and Julie's life and our entire family, and he doesn't care. He is obviously a very dangerous man." When she had finished, the judge looked at Paul and asked if he had anything he wanted to say. Ingram rose and said, "I stand before you. I stand before God. I have never sexually abused my daughters. I am not guilty of these crimes." Paul Ingram was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. This was an unusually long sentence for these crimes. He made many attempts to appeal his case, but his guilty plea made all attempts fall on deaf ears. 12 years into his sentence, it was time for Paul's parole hearing. The parole board heard submissions recommending release from memory expert Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, Dr. Richard Ofshie, and journalist Lawrence Wright, who wrote a book about the case. However, Gary Edwards, the sheriff when Paul was arrested, as well as Paul's son, submitted their recommendation against Paul being released. Chad informed the parole board that they shouldn't release his father, as Paul had abused him during his childhood between the ages of 4 and 16. During initial interviews with police, he had also accused others, but withdrew these accusations, stating that he only said this to please the police at the time. Of the 5 people on the parole board, 2 voted against parole, 1 recommended parole, 1 was absent, and the chairperson has not revealed their vote. On the 13th of December, 1996, his parole was denied. During his incarceration, life went on. His ex-wife moved to a different town with their son and had their surnames changed. His daughter Erica moved away and appeared on talk shows talking about satanic abuse. I can't find any information about Paul's sons or his ex-wife after his release. Paul's parents were buried in legal debt after the case and would eventually pass away before Paul was released. His mother passed just 3 months before Paul had finished his prison sentence. The Thurston County Sheriff's Department, led by Sheriff Gary Edwards, stuck with their story that evidence was discovered on the Ingram property and that Ingram's daughters' bodies are marked with numerous scars. Even after close examination revealed there were no scars consistent with the abuse the victims describe. When Paul was about to be released, the Sheriff Gary Edwards stated that he had no regrets about the case. When told of some remarks that he would have to stand before God and be judged for his actions here, Edwards simply stated, "I sleep good at night." However, sometime after Paul's release, the sheriff admitted that there was no evidence of his guilt, except Paul's dubious confessions. His other daughter, Julie, stated that she no longer believes she was abused, but that the memories she has were just bad dreams. She visited Paul in prison in 1993. She later wrote to him stating, "I didn't want you to be there. I wish I could come and take you away. I'd love to be held by you. I wish Jesus could reunite our family again." On the 8th of April 2003, Paul was released from prison. He was then 57 years of age and a registered sex offender. He was referred to as a level 3 offender, the most dangerous kind, likely to reoffend. He has been offered several jobs in Maine, but still struggled to be reintegrated into society, as many in his neighborhood were afraid of him. There is very little information as to what happened after this, so unfortunately, we don't know if Paul ever did reoffend as some feared, or if his case was ever investigated again, since both his daughter and the sheriff have expressed doubts regarding the case. As there is seemingly no new information about this, it seems like neither of these things have happened. On the 10th of June, 1991, an 11-year-old girl named Jaycee was on her way to catch the school bus, wearing her favorite pink outfit. The bus stop was close, but about halfway to the bus stop, a gray van pulled up beside her. The driver rolled down the window and asked Jaycee for directions. Then, before Jaycee could answer, the man pulled out a stun gun and tased her. A woman runs out of the van and pulls Jaycee into the back of the van. It is a parent's worst nightmare. And from Jaycee's house, her stepfather sees the whole kidnapping go down. He rushes out and gets on his bike. The van drives to the bus stop and turns around. Jaycee's stepfather, going as fast as he can, eventually loses sight of the gray van. When a child is kidnapped, the first few minutes and hours are crucial. According to a 2006 child abduction study, 76% of abducted children die within the first 3 hours after being abducted. After 24 hours, this number rises to almost 90%. Within hours of Jaycee's kidnapping, the story was covered by local and national media in South Lake Tahoe. The search for Jaycee was immense, but despite this, she was not found within those crucial 24 hours. In the first few days after the disappearance, dozens of local volunteers joined the search effort, utilizing nearly every resource in the community. 4 days after the kidnapping, it was featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted. In the weeks following the incident, tens of thousands of flyers and posters were distributed to businesses nationwide. Many organizations were involved in the search. Despite their efforts to find Jaycee, no trace of her was found. However, things took a turn in 2009, 18 years after the kidnapping. Officer Allie Jacobs received a phone call from a former colleague of hers who was now a special events manager at the University of California's Berkeley campus office. She asked if Officer Jacobs could sit in on a meeting with a strange man she had an appointment with. Officer Jacobs agreed, but wanted to see if he had a criminal record first. He did. He was on parole for rape. The following day, the man, named Philip Garrido, met with the special events manager and police officer Jacobs at the police station in Berkeley's Sprout Hall. He brought his 2 daughters, and something seemed off with them. While Philip spoke with the special events manager, Allie spoke with the 2 girls. She asked them different questions and found their behavior to be strange, and their answers raised some red flags. The only information she was able to gather before Philip interrupted and left with the girls was that they were his daughters. They had an older sister in her 20s, that they were being homeschooled, and that one of the girls had a birth defect that seemed easily treatable. Officer Jacobs had a hunch that something wasn't right. She called the parole office and left a message with her concerns. She was called back by Philip's parole officer, Edward Santos Jr., and he had some interesting information. Philip did not have any children. Officer Santos and another parole officer visited Philip's home. Unable to find the children, Philip was ordered to come by the station the following day. The next day, Philip arrived with his wife, the 2 girls, and their big sister, Alyssa Franzen. All 5 of them were interviewed, and Edward Santos Jr. was interviewing them. The 3 adults gave conflicting stories on the origins of the 2 girls. Edward kept pushing them. During his interview with Alyssa, she informed him that Philip was a great person, and this was echoed by the 2 girls. However, when Alyssa was asked to provide proof of her identity, she became defensive. When pressed further, she became agitated and demanded to know why she was being interrogated. Eventually, Alyssa told him that she was from Minnesota and was hiding from her abusive husband. Edward contacted the Concord police. As they arrived, Philip broke and told them the truth. He told them that he had kidnapped Alyssa when she was just a child. A female police officer entered the interrogation room where Alyssa was waiting alone. She told the woman calling herself Alyssa that Philip had confessed. Then the officer asked Alyssa for her real name. Having not said her real name in 18 years, she asked the officer for a pen so she could write it down. Her hand shaking, she wrote her name on a small piece of paper. Jaycee Lee Dugard. Jaycee had spent 18 horrifying years imprisoned by Philip. Let us go back to the 10th of June, 1991, to just after the gray van had sped off. Philip Garrido and his wife Nancy brought 11-year-old Jaycee into their yard and chained her inside a soundproofed shed. Philip warned her that if she tried to escape, he had trained dogs outside that would attack her. Her survival instinct kicked in, and it would keep her alive for the next 18 years. She did what she had to do and played the part she was forced to play during this terrifying ordeal. Over the next 3 years, Philip would force himself on Jaycee at least once a week. Jaycee has said, "At times I feel like I'm still 11 years old." But something inside that frightened little girl made her a survivor, and she has made me the person I am today. The days in the soundproofed shed were long, and in the beginning she would spend a lot of her time sleeping. She has said, "There was nothing else to do, and sleeping helped to shut off my broken heart." Philip told Jaycee that demon angels had allowed him to kidnap her to help him with his sexual problems. He would also go on meth binges in the shed and force Jaycee to keep him company. At the end of these, he would switch between sobbing and apologizing to her. About 7 months into her captivity, Philip introduced Jaycee to his wife Nancy. Jaycee has said that Nancy was just as manipulative as Philip was. Jaycee kept a journal. When Philip discovered that she signed it with her own name, he had a long talk with her, telling her that it was dangerous to do that. That was the last time she used her own name until she wrote it down for the police officer 18 years later. On Easter Sunday, 1994, they told her that they believed she was pregnant. At age 14, she gave birth to her first daughter. Jaycee says her children are the most precious things in the world. She would rock her first daughter in a rocking chair and sing, "You Are My Sunshine," like Jaycee's mother had done to her when she was a baby. After the birth, Philip wouldn't force himself on Jaycee as frequently as he had before. The last time he ever forced himself on her was the conception of her second daughter in 1997. By then, she had been captive for 6 years. To cope, she would plant flowers in the garden and homeschool her kids. Jaycee was told that she and her daughters would have to address Nancy as the mother of the girls. Philip also operated a print shop where Jaycee would help as a graphic designer. Then, in August 2009, they all went to the police station together. Though I've already told this story, I wish to share Jaycee's perspective. When they arrived, Philip was separated from the rest of them. Jaycee and Nina said exactly what they were supposed to say to the officers. Though pressed about who Jaycee was, they maintained their story. Then they were allowed to leave, and the 4 of them went into the car to wait for Philip. Then Edward Santos Jr., who had interviewed her, and another parole officer came out. They brought Jaycee back into the station, alone. She was told she was lying, that Philip had said the kids weren't hers. Terrified that she would lose her kids, her survival instinct kicked in. She lied and said that Philip was lying for her, that she was hiding herself and her kids from her abusive husband. She was left alone in the room. She felt alone, abandoned by everyone. A female officer entered, and they continued to pressure her to tell the truth. Jaycee asked to talk to Philip. He was brought into the interrogation room, and Jaycee asked him what she should do. He told her to ask for a lawyer. Jaycee had asked for a lawyer several times, but the police officers kept asking her back why she needs a lawyer when she says she hasn't done anything wrong. However, the female officer had been sympathetic towards Jaycee. The officer reassured Jaycee that her kids were fine. Jaycee was left in the room on her own for a long time. She realized she was on her own, and that right now, what mattered was her and her kids. Then the female police officer entered again. She told Jaycee that Philip had confessed. Then the officer asked her for her real name. Having not said her real name in 18 years, Jaycee asked the officer for a pen so she could write it down. Her hand shaking, she wrote her name on a small piece of paper. Jaycee Lee Dugard. Jaycee felt like a spell had been broken. She was free. When asked to write her birth date and the name of her mother, she said, "I can see my mom?" And the female officer happily confirmed that she could. The police officers called Jaycee's mother, Terry Dugard. They reached her at her workplace, and then the call Terry and Jaycee had been waiting for 18 long years finally happened. Jaycee was at a loss for words. Then, the first thing she said was that she had babies. Jaycee says in her book, A Stolen Life, that she couldn't believe she said that. None of them remember much else from that conversation, just pure excitement to see each other again. Chris Campion, the FBI agent who had worked on the case since the kidnapping, said that there wasn't a dry eye in the room when Jaycee and her mother were reunited. Philip Garrido was sentenced to 431 years in prison for his crimes, while Nancy was sentenced to 36 years. She is eligible for parole in 2029. Jaycee was not present at the sentencing, but sent a statement with her mother, which was read during the hearing. The letter said, "I chose not to be here today because I refuse to waste another second of my life in your presence. I've chosen to have my mom read this for me. Philip Garrido, you are wrong. I could never say that to you before, but I have the freedom now, and I am saying you are a liar, and all of your so-called theories are wrong. Everything you have ever done to me has been wrong, and someday I hope you can see that. What you and Nancy did was reprehensible. You always justified everything to suit yourself, but the reality is, and always has been, that to make someone else suffer for your inability to control yourself, and for you, Nancy, to facilitate his behavior and trick young girls for his pleasure, is evil. There is no God in the universe that would condone your actions. You called yourself an honest man, but these are just words to you. They were your tools of choice, and you wielded them with brute force. To you, Philip, I say that I have always been a thing for your own amusement. I hated every second of every day of 18 years because of you and the sexual perversion you forced on me. To you, Nancy, I have nothing to say. Both of you can save your apologies and empty words. For all the crimes you have both committed, I hope you have as many sleepless nights as I did. Yes, as I think of all of those years, I am angry because you stole my life and that of my family. Thankfully, I am doing well now and no longer live in a nightmare. I have wonderful friends and family around me, something you can never take from me again. You do not matter anymore." After they were reunited, Jaycee and her family were immediately sent into hiding to protect them from the press. Officer Edward Santos Jr. was told to keep quiet and hope he gets to keep his job. The authorities received a lot of criticism for failing to discover Jaycee sooner. Though Edward had only been Philip's parole officer for a relatively short time, some people blamed him. He would receive threats towards him and his family after the discovery of Jaycee. Officer Allie Jacobs has been hugged and praised for following her hunch. She was later injured, and after 2 failed surgeries, she was medically retired from the force. Not long after, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. But after 5 months of chemotherapy, she was told in 2015 she was cancer-free. She studied and received a master's in criminology and is now teaching criminal justice. As of 2022, she had still not met Jaycee. Today, Jaycee lives with her 2 girls, and she works with therapy horses. She has mostly stayed out of the public eye, but has written 2 books, one called A Stolen Life, and another called Freedom, My Book of Firsts, as well as establishing the Jaycee organization. Its mission is to be of service to families and individuals that have experienced a severe crisis challenge, or conflict through a major life disruption, to spread the message of hope, growth, and resiliency through educational and animal-assisted programs, to encourage the collaboration of various entities to provide protected spaces for families to heal. Of her first Christmas at home, Jaycee has said, "It was the best Christmas ever, but it wasn't the presents that made it special. It was being able to see my mom smile and happy, and seeing that my sister turned into a beautiful woman, and knowing my aunt never forgot me. Knowing I had a family was the biggest and best gift of all." Thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about this, my sources, as well as corrections, if any, will be in the video's description. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you feel I deserve it, you can click the like button or subscribe. And I hope you'll watch my next video as well.